At the beginning of the film, a character named Henry makes an appearance. Henry's son is blind, and he himself has married with such a girl, who is younger than him. He is wealthiest man, and it may be known, casting a glance at his villa. It is seen in the next scene that Henry was displaying his villa to his wife. His big house had multi-rooms which were locked, and biometric was required to enter such rooms. Such program had been created for this, that these all doors will open with the biometric of Henry. They both pass near a room. Elizabeth asks Henry that, "What is in this room?" Henry replies, "You are the owner of everything which is in this room. But you will have to give your words to me, as you will not come near this room. Nor you will go inside. There are my research equipment inside." Elizabeth asks on this, "I am not allowed to enter any room, because your biometric is required to unlock each room." Henry replies on this, "I have also set your biometric with mine in the system. Due to this, you can also enter any room now." Next day, Henry had to leave outside for something. He goes outside that he will return to home after a day. Elizabeth talks with maid that Henry's IQ level is so high and he is a successful man. Why did he marry with an ordinary girl like me? Maid says on this, "I have no knowledge about this." Elizabeth was alone at home at the same night, and she was becoming so curious, why should I not enter that forbidden room? And I may check as what is in that room. She goes back on Henry's words and enters the room. She discovers many boxes. Entering the room, there were red and green lights in some of those boxes. The box which had green light referred to the heart rate. That box appears before her as she presses its button. Elizabeth had left shocked, seeing this. There was Elizabeth's duplicate in this box. She was so scared, seeing this. And she leaves the room hurriedly. But her hand's thumb is injured because of running as such. In the next scene, Henry had returned to home. As he witnesses the confusion of Elizabeth, then he had assumed that Elizabeth had surely visited that room to check what is there. In spite of knowing this, he does not interrogate Elizabeth. Henry is seen, he was moving to the same basement. Elizabeth chases him, but she was frightened while witnessing the sword in Henry's hand. She observes that Henry is in a great rage. He says, "I had disallowed you to enter that room. In spite of this, you went. Why did you do so?" Elizabeth was so afraid, hearing this. She begins to seek apology from Henry. "Forgive me. I will never re-enter that room." Being aggressive, Henry assaults Elizabeth to kill him. Elizabeth was running as being afraid from him. She wanted to leave the house. All doors were being unlocked before because of her biometric. But no door was unlocking now. Poor Elizabeth could not go out of the house now. She hides in a room there, but Henry finds her. And he kills her. Henry, his son and maid bury her dead body. In the next scene, detective comes here who used to make the visits here before. And he always used to ask Henry's wife on his arrival. Detective says, "You always reply the same whenever I visit here. Your wife is currently in a state of slumber." Henry says, "The girls of nowadays spend their mostly time in sleeping." Hearing all, detective goes from there. It is shown 6 weeks later that Henry has married with Elizabeth again. And he has brought her at home. Then all moments are seen in repetition here. As it was seen at the start how Henry had shown Elizabeth the whole house. And he forbids him to enter a specific room. Henry's son, Oliver, goes outside with his maid. This, Elizabeth, also enters the same room again like the previous Elizabeth. She witnesses, going there are red lights in all boxes. There is green light in a box placed at the end. There are 5 boxes in which 4 have red lights while 1 has green one. It indicates that 4, Elizabeth, have died. 1, Elizabeth, who is alive in the box while other, Elizabeth, who is present here. Now this, Elizabeth, also opens that green light box. She becomes so scared, seeing her duplicate. And she falls asleep in her room, running there hurriedly. Henry wakes her up, coming there. She says, "You all had gone while leaving me alone." Henry replies on this, "I had given off day to maid yesterday. She went, taking my son with her." After it, Elizabeth moves to the lavatory. Henry follows her and asks, "You had promised me that you will not enter that room. Had you not remembered your promise?" Now, Henry was in full fury, so he wanted to suffocate Elizabeth using a towel. But Elizabeth moves to the kitchen while escaping her somehow. She holds a knife there, so she may save her, showing this knife if Henry comes to her. But shrewd Henry attacks her from the backside, and he uses chloroform to make Elizabeth unconscious. But this Elizabeth was sharp-witted. She pretends to be unconscious. She fatally injures Henry by wielding a knife. But she herself loses her consciousness because of chloroform after killing him. After a while, when she restores her senses, she begins to unlock all the doors while using Henry's fingerprints. But no door is unlocked. She hides the dead body of Henry there. And she also burns many things. After this, she dials an emergency contact number, so someone may come to rescue her. After a time, Maid and Henry's son return back to home. Maid estimates this when she witnesses Elizabeth in sound state. That Henry is no more. Seeing this, she becomes so worried, and she suffers heart attack in this affliction. But she dials emergency contact number before losing her consciousness. She is carried to the hospital. Elizabeth is seen. She observes the unlocked door of the house and thinks to move outside. Meanwhile, Henry's son threatens her, "If you step out of this house, police will arrest you because you have murdered Henry. And I know about this. If you want this, that police may not arrest you, then burn the corpse of Henry." After this, it is seen that Elizabeth burns the corpse of Henry with the help of his son. Elizabeth asks Henry's son, "Who am I?" He tells Henry, "Created 6, Elizabeth, like you." Henry was genetic scientist. He also tells, "You are number 5, Elizabeth." And 4 inches Elizabeth had been died before. Then they witness a car driving there. Oliver could not see that car. So he asks Elizabeth, "Tell me the color of this car." Elizabeth tells him the car's color, so he informs he is detective. Now this detective comes to home. He asks Henry's son, Oliver, coming inside, "Where is Henry?" He replies on this, "Ask about this from Elizabeth." Detective says to Elizabeth, "Henry always told me this whenever I visited his house, that you are sleeping." Elizabeth says to detective, "Yes, I had been sleeping before, but Henry is sleeping at this time." Henry's son kills the detective before his further interrogation. Henry's son asks Elizabeth, after killing him, that has he died or still alive? Elizabeth tells him he is dead. Henry's son says to her that, "Run away, grabbing money from here." It is seen that Elizabeth keeps money in her possession, but Henry's son comes to her, taking a diary. And he asks Elizabeth to read this diary, bringing this. Because Oliver was blind and he could not read this diary himself. Oliver goes away, locking her in a room while dodging her. Elizabeth requests too much to unlock the room, but no one appears to help her. Elizabeth had the same diary belong to Henry's maid. Elizabeth begins to read that diary and knows it after reading that maid is actually a virologist who had been called a time ago for help by Henry. In fact, Henry's wife suffered from any affliction. Due to this, she died. Henry wanted to revive his wife, so he created 6 clones, taking her blood cells. But those 2 clones had also the same disease. So 2 clones also died. When maid arrived to help Henry, then only 4 clones had remained. Then it is seen that this maid continues to struggle hard for 2 years while researching. At last, she discovers the remedy to end the disorder of those clones. After this, third, Elizabeth was brought out of the chamber. But this Elizabeth, who was Henry's wife, could not retain her memory for a long time. In the meantime, she goes to the same room where her clones had been kept. She is confused, seeing her clones, and runs out of the house. But detective glimpses him on the way and takes her back to Henry. And detective had started doubting on Henry because of this action. This was the cause that he often used to visit Henry's house. After this, the present scene is shown where Elizabeth was locked in a room. Then Oliver comes there and Elizabeth falls her down while hitting when he opens the room. And she asks him the password of the doors. Then she ties him, and she herself moves out of the house. But Oliver had told her the wrong password. But Elizabeth did not know this. When she applies the password, moving outside, then the door remains locked. She becomes so aggressive. She again moves to the same room where she had tied. Oliver was not there. She holds a knife in her hand, and she goes to the basement where Oliver was feeling the last. Elizabeth standing there. Elizabeth asks him, "Coming here, what are you doing here?" He tells, "I am attempting to maintain this Elizabeth's survival, and I need help of yours for this." Hearing this, Elizabeth goes to that clone. Then Elizabeth gets the advantage of this and he makes Elizabeth unconscious. He takes her into a room and chains her feet. In the next scene, the same Elizabeth is seen who is reading that maid's diary further. It is revealed in the story that third Elizabeth also met her end, because the retaining power of her cells was ending. Then it is seen that Henry and maid were struggling together that they may stabilize her cells. Then the story moves to the present scene again where Oliver comes to Elizabeth again. And he asks, "Is there written something about me in this diary?" Elizabeth tells on this, "I did not read it till now." Oliver tells Elizabeth he despises Henry too much, because it was Henry who blinded him. Elizabeth reads the diary further, where she comes to know that Henry had created the young clone of his wife. He was so aged, but he also created his young clone later. In fact, Oliver is the young clone of Henry. Elizabeth was telling it to Oliver. He becomes so frightened, knowing this, because he used to hate Henry. Even he had no knowledge about this, that he himself is the young clone of Henry. Now, Elizabeth encourages Oliver. When he comes to Elizabeth, then he again falls him down and asks the password of the house's doors. At this time, Oliver tells the correct code of the house's doors. Then the sixth clone of Elizabeth comes there, who had been awakened by Oliver. Now fifth Elizabeth wanted to escape from here, because sixth Elizabeth wanted to kill her. Now fifth Elizabeth, who knows the whole reality, she wanted to tell the story to sixth Elizabeth. How have they been used? But sixth clone of Elizabeth does not value fifth Elizabeth's words, and she does not believe in her at all. Oliver is going to go near sixth Elizabeth. Then fifth Elizabeth attacks him, and she places him before sixth clone of Elizabeth. But sixth Elizabeth fires the gun, and this gunshot targets fifth Elizabeth while passing through Oliver. Oliver dies because of receiving gunshot, but fifth Elizabeth was wounded. Sixth Elizabeth goes to Oliver. Taking the advantage of this, fifth clone of Elizabeth sets the code on house's door. She was going to leave the house, but it is observed at the same time that fifth one Elizabeth attacks sixth Elizabeth. She had fired the gun at her, but fifth Elizabeth leaves the world after saying it to sixth Elizabeth, "Read the diary of maid at any cost." Now sixth Elizabeth does the same, and she comes to know after reading the whole diary. Oliver, who was all right, it was the cause because he was the clone of Henry. And Henry did not suffer any disease. And he wanted to kill all Elizabeth's clones for this cause, because his real wife used to agree with him in every matter. When he takes the promise from them that you have to stop going to that room, they still went. Henry wanted to kill all of them because of these actions. In the end of the movie, it is seen that maid is in this house. And number sixth Elizabeth is moving away the house. And the movie completes on this scene.